Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a Luticia deck profile. This is probably one of the most underrated decks in the format at the moment. This is definitely a deck that you should definitely consider for the BSF and your team composition. I think there will be teams out there, and we have seen in the most recent BSF events that Luticia is a good deck, so make sure you are testing against this, and maybe it might be even a pick for your team as well. This guide will go through the deck build itself. I know that there are some expensive cards for the deck build, so some budget alternatives, lines of play as well, formations, sequence of attacks. I think those are really important in Luticia, and we're going to talk about how Luticia goes against the big dogs like Chronojet, Eva, and the likes in this current format. If you guys need any coaching, feel free to hit me up on Metafy. My link is in the description below. Feel free to book a session and we can get started. So starting off, we have the Luticia ride lines, the grade 1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. The ride line allows you for a free ride up on grade 3 by soul blasting 1 Luticia, as well as it searches for your curse play orders. Following from that, we have 3 Luticia. Persona rides are always good. This deck doesn't need Persona ride, just because of the nature of Luticia herself, just a restanding Vanguard. So if you get any triggers off drive checks, you pretty much put it on Luticia. Following from that, probably the best unit in the deck is Nostria. Nostria is your MVP of the deck, allows you to check top 3 for any card and put it into soul. The good thing about this card is that in combination with Yuika, you're able to put any card from the top 3 into your soul, the rest on bottom. So the longer the game goes, you can stack your triggers, so you can put your heals, your crits in specific orders, and then map out to hit double trigger or triple trigger on the restand for your Luticia. But most importantly, it can put any card in soul, which means that if you find perfect guards off this, you can put it into soul, and then essentially later you can call the perfect guard out using your normal order to bounce it back with Yuika. The dynamic of this card is so insane, makes this deck work like a charm. So that's Nostria. And then the last grade 2 slot is Ludivine. Essentially it is a Soul Blast 1 for 10k power if you have 2 or more curse play orders in soul. Just a big bait stick for the deck. Outside of Nostria, nothing else really hits big, so just having another body that hits big is always good. Moving forward, so we have 4 Yuikas, probably one of the most important cards in this deck. I know this card is super expensive, so finding this is pretty hard, or obtaining this is pretty hard. Essentially, this combos really well with your normal order because anything that you put in front of this can be bounced back to hand. So if you have PGs in soul, any important units in soul, even if you have triggers in soul by randomly soul charging, you're able to just bounce it back to hand. Additionally, this becomes 13k or a booster 13k, or the unit that it's in front. It gives 5k to the column, which is really important because if you put this behind a Nostra, that's what, 25? If I'm not mistaken, yeah, 25 plus 8, 33, and then 38 essentially. So 38, 48 on Persona Ride, really insane numbers if you put Nostria in front of this as well. It also allows for protection of Nostria. So if Nostria is in front of this, you can Soul Blast 1 after boost, bounce on Nostria back, and it's protected for the next turn. Your opponent can't bottom deck that. So like if you're versing Chronojet, can't bottom deck that as well. So Yuika is like super good in this deck. Obviously, you know, prices on that card may restrict people from being able to obtain it. 3 DPGs and then 1 Elementaria. Elementaria is a little bit weird in this deck because you also run blitz orders, but sometimes you can kind of trade off the blitz order for this. Sometimes, you kind of have to. There is a theory, or a reason for running the 4th PG, because you can then, soul charge and bounce with Yuika. But I guess bypassing guard restrict in this meta, especially against Chronojet, is really important. The last grade 1 that we run is Aura. Aura's skill is when the attack that this unit boosts hits, you can retire this, search for an order card, and add it to hand from your deck. Then shuffle your deck. The best thing about this is that it can search for your Elementaria. Not only does it include the normal curse play orders, you can also search for Elementaria, which is why this card is really strong. Putting this behind your Vanguard, your opponent has a lot of trouble trying to guard it in the early game, which means that you can fish out for your blitz orders to guard against your opponent so that you get the minimum 4 that you need for Luticia. Super strong card, very good generic card, and as I just mentioned, we're running 4 of each of the curse play orders. So the first one allows you to call any card from Soul and that unit gains +5. So if you call PGs of this and put it in front of Yuika, then it's automatically an 11. You call Nostra, immediately a 30k if you have 4 curse play orders. Really insane card, allows you to tutor for anything, and if you need anything in your hand and it's available in Soul, then you're able to get it if you put it in front of a Yuika. Then the last one is a free 15k shield. This is a blitz order that allows you to draw if you have 4 or more curse play orders in Soul. So when you guard with it, blitz order it, give your Vanguard +15, and then draw 1 if you have 4 curse play orders. Super insane card, really, really strong. For triggers, we can run the 15k heal. You can run the effect heals as well if you find or deem that is worthy, but I think the 15k heal is just good. It's just a generically good guardable card in the early game, especially if you're playing against Chrono Jets. You don't really want to be ditching 10k shields, but sometimes you can. And then for the crits, so you run 8 vanilla crits. Soul is not a problem in this deck, and the fact that you can call 5ks in front of Yuika makes it so that it hits a tier. If you call 4k in front of Yuika, then you're hitting 12s or 16s. You're essentially missing out 5k extra power, which means 5k extra shield that you could be, outputting from your opponent. So that is 8 crits. 1 overtrigger. Overtriggers are overtrigger. Make sure you run it. Especially this one in this deck build. Lyrical OT actually makes your Nostra and Yuika super insane, super fat numbers reaching like 60k plus, and the longer the game goes, it's ridiculous. And then the last trigger that we run, fronts. Fronts instead of draws, because this deck soul charges a lot, and pretty much if you hit draws, you're bound to deck out. Hence why we run fronts. The good thing about the fronts is that if you ever soul charge it, you can put it in front, bounce it back with the Yuika, and you get a free 20k shield in hand. Really, really strong, but I wouldn't recommend running draws, because essentially you soul charge with Nostra, soul charge with your normal order, you draw 1 using your blitz order. There's a lot of cards going through. Luticia restands, Luticia draws as well. You're burning through a lot of deck count, so if you're running draws, you're actually decking out quicker. So hence we are running fronts in this deck. A few changes that you could consider. I know that there are some cards in this deck that are, a little bit more expensive than others, such as Yuika. Yuika is too expensive. There are 2 cards that you could probably replace Yuika with, but it doesn't really serve the same purpose. Yuika is just a really generically good card, which is Modett. Modett's skill is when this unit is placed on rearguard, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Luticia, you can count +1, choose a curse play card from your drop zone and add it to hand. This is only good for later to salvage your blitz orders or your normal order so that you can call from deck. But I think this card is too slow, especially with Yuika. If there was any reason why this, like your curse play orders in the drop zone early on in the game, then yeah, maybe this becomes good, but very hard to justify running this over the Yuika. But in the case that you do want to replace the Yuika, this is another card that you can run as a budget option. Another card that you can use as a budget option is Justine. This deck actually has insane amounts of soul, so you have to discard using Luticia and discarding 1. If you're discarding a Justine, then you can call this back either behind your Vanguard or in front as a multi-attacker. So really, really strong. So soul +1, call it to an open rearguard circle. That's the only bit that is really annoying, is the fact that it can only be called to an open rearguard circle. So multi-attack isn't really good with this deck in terms of the front row, unless you can get rid of your front row somehow. As I mentioned before, you can run each of the effect heals if you like. If the meta calls for, crit-oriented Vanguards, then you can run Flow, and then you can run Rhyme if, there's a lot of restanding rearguards as well. So if you're looking to replace the Ludivine for something else, you can use Melty. Melty allows you to cast 1, call a card and draw 1. So that means that you can dig through your deck in the early game to find your orders. That's another card that you can use. The only problem with this is that if your opponent is smart and damage denies you, then you're in a pretty bad situation, especially if you're going first into a Luticia. You don't have the resources to be able to restand with Luticia, which is kind of annoying, but otherwise, you can dig through your deck by using Melty as well. There are options for you to run instead of crits. If you want a rarity bump somehow, you can run the 4k crit, but as I explained before, the 5k crit is just so useful, especially with the conjunction with Yuika. It just makes numbers better, and especially if you're in a pinch situation, you can place the 5k behind your Vanguard, and then that's like 18, 23 even by itself. So running the 5k crit is actually super important. So what are your Mulligan targets? Your Mulligan targets are these 3. You definitely want to keep your orders. The orders themselves in the early game, especially this one, counts as a unit that you can commit onto the board to start attacking with. So you always treat this card in your hand as a playable unit, because as of grade 1, you want to use this as soon as possible. Even if you're not attacking on the first turn and call it to the back row, just because then you can have this in your soul. This is a free 15k shield, which you can use on grade 1 on your opponent's turn to essentially no pass a solo hitting Vanguard. If your opponent hits for 14, then it doesn't matter, you can kind of ditch this, put it into soul. If your opponent doesn't trigger, then the attack is guarded. Otherwise, your opponent's going to give you 1 damage, 1 more resource that you can use for Luticia. So these 2, really important that you keep 2 copies or have ways to find 2 copies. Well, even 3 copies actually. If you have Aura or if you have Nostra, then you're able to cycle through your deck to find these, and hence why Nostra is the 3rd card to keep, because then you can start searching for your deck for like top 3s to find any of these orders and make sure that they are in soul. Your right line searches for 1 of these orders, and if you ever get the chance to maybe keep 1 extra unit in your starting hand, then the other unit that you may consider would be Aura. Aura allows you to play it behind the Vanguard in the first 2 turns, essentially making your Vanguard attack for 14 and 16, which is not just a 15k no pass, which means that if you hit a trigger, then it goes through. You can start searching for your orders as well. So these are usually the 4 that you keep in terms of priority. You definitely want to keep orders so that you get 4 by the time you hit to grade 3. Nostra next if you can't find these 2. But even then, like, Nostra is just good because you can commit it early in front of a Yuika. Yuika then bounces this, and then you can start cycling through your deck and thin out non-trigger units as well. And then if you don't have many orders, you would want to look to keep the Aura, put it into the back row, hit with your Vanguard while this boosts, and then search for 1 of your orders so that you get 4 by the time you reach grade 3 into your soul. So what are some plays with this deck? If you ride up to grade 1, then the first thing you want to do is to use this order. So you put into soul, soul charge 1, and then call unit out from your soul to rearguard. You want to keep the Luticia in soul, just because then you can start soul blasting Luticias later on for your grade 2 free ride skill. Alternatively, if you get a trigger, then you can place it back here, and then later on you can push this to the front, put a Yuika back here, attack with these, and then use the Yuika to bounce this back to hand. So you get a free 20k shield just off that, which is why Yuika is such an important card of this deck. Alternatively also, if you ride to grade 2, and then you use your order again, let's just say you had a second order. Let's say you had an order and then you use it, soul charge 1, soul charge the Nostra. Nostra can call out, use the top 3, and then let's just say you hit 1 of these orders, you put into soul, and now you have 3. So that's really important. And then, this provides protection. So, you boost with Yuika and the Nostra returns back to hand so that you can use her on the next turn as well. So generally, Yuika is used as a form of protection. for any of the units that you want to keep, because then your opponent can't really touch it. The only way that they can get rid of it is if you guard with it, but that is within your control. By the time you reach the grade 3, you obviously want 4 orders in Soul, and generally you can keep one of your normal orders because then you can use it, Soul Charge 1, and then maybe call this to the back row, and now you have 4, which means that you fulfill Luticia's skill, well, Luticia's condition to essentially restand. Generally, like how the attack pattern works in this deck, let's just say you had, Nostra here and then like 1 CB or something. Generally, how the attack pattern works is that you attack with your Vanguard first, and then allocate the triggers accordingly. Generally, the first attack is when you boost, because that is when your Vanguard is most weakest, because in terms of the power, if you don't play a normal order, this will only be 18 or so. Alternatively, on the second swing, it'll be 18 as well, but the likelihood of you hitting triggers in a compressed deck makes it so that it becomes actually 28 or 38, depending on how many triggers you hit as well. So the first attack, you always want to boost. And generally, in the early game, if you're boosting 18 with a 6, it's 24. It's going to be a little bit awkward for your opponent to guard, and then you can sack this, search for like one of your blitz orders, or even like your Elementaria, you add it to hand. But then the second time, you restand, you've hit a bunch of triggers or something, CP1, and then you attack with a beefier Vanguard the second time around. These two sides are already big because Nostra herself is 25k by herself, and then as the game goes on, you have like a bunch of different cards in Soul. Let's just say you Soul Charge your Over Trigger, you can like Soul Blast your crit, bounce back the Nostra, and then next turn, let's just say you have one more of those orders in, Soul Charge 1, and then you have an Over Trigger. So now you have a free 50k shield for the next turn. So lots of things you can toolbox from your Soul, especially with your normal orders, which is really good. One thing that really helps, especially if you're playing a budget version of this deck with this card, is that when you start Soul Blasting, you want to Soul Blast your normal orders so that you can retrieve them back with this and then continue to abuse Yuika. But if you have Yuika, then you're not really playing this card anyways. So yeah, that's pretty much the lines of play. It's very simple with this deck. Usually it's just Vanguard, Vanguard, Rearguard, Rearguard. In terms of the attack pattern, very, very easy. So how does this deck kind of fit into the metagame at the moment? It's a restanding Vanguard. Very similar to Overlord, but the good thing about this deck is that it actually has an insane hand size. Because of Yuika, you're able to just spam your normal orders, call like a bunch of like, cards that you can bounce with Yuika, and it's just really, really strong. Having access to this, being able to search your Elementaria is super strong as well. But also, Nostra allows you to filter out normal units and non-trigger cards from your deck. So meaning, the longer the game goes, your deck becomes super small, and then you're just going to trigger the crap out of your opponent. So yeah, that's pretty much Luticia in a nutshell. How does this play into something like Eva? Eva is pretty easy because you start spamming your normal orders and getting free units, bounce it with Yuika so that you're attacking 2 lines, you're attacking like at a good decent pace, you're not committing 3 units into the front row and bashing 3 times. Because you have Yuika, the unit that you place in front can be bounced back to hand, forcing the Eva to attack your Vanguard, which means that you can take 1 damage to restand on your grade 3 ride. Other than that, Eva is a slow deck, so you can play a slower game. You don't always feel that you're going to be at, in a dangerous spot because of like, a lack of hand in the early game, because this deck takes a lot of time to kind of build up. So if you have like a bunch of orders, don't feel bad against Eva, because Eva is a slow deck. It will start to smash you a little bit. You'll be in high damage, but then you stabilize, similar to how Eva works as well. You get rushed, soak a bunch of damage, and then essentially build up your hand using Yuika, just bouncing stuff that you call off the normal order, or even your Nostras. And then sometimes, you're going through 3 drive checks a turn, check a bunch of heals, and you're pretty much good to go. Into something like Overlord, you have the hand size to cope against Overlord. Overlord has a stronger Vanguard, but weaker rearguards in terms of a comparison with Luticia, whereas Luticia is the opposite. Luticia has a smaller Vanguard but a bigger rearguard. So these two by itself is 33, Persona Ride 43, 48 if you call it in front of two Yuikas. So the rearguards are actually bigger than Overlord naturally. In terms of the hand size, I think the hand size for this deck is really strong the longer the game goes. And then pretty much once you get to the bottom of the deck, your opponent can't afford to 2 to pass your Vanguard because you're going to hit 2 triggers, put it all to Vanguard, and then pretty much break 3 or 2 to pass. That's one of the really good things about Luticia. Hence why, you know, I think Luticia is one of the decks that people are underestimating for this Springfest. This deck does seem a little bit outdated, but sometimes, you know, don't fix what's not broken. This deck is really strong, stable as the game progresses. The only fragile times where this deck feels a little bit iffy is in the early game because you have like a bunch of orders. You can't really guard with them other than the Blitz order. But the moment when you reach the grade 3 and you start, you know, farming up, you start using your Nostras, you bounce with your Yuikas, and just naturally you get like a lot of cards because Luticia draws 1 and it discards 1, so essentially you +1 just by, you know, attacking with Yuika, CB1, draw 1. And the ride line itself allows you to free ride, so you save a card from hand. Yeah, so everything here is essentially free. How does this deck play into something like, I guess, Minerva? Minerva is just slower-ish. You don't really get too much out of like Minerva. Minerva, you play like a normal game, a little bit faster than Eva, but pretty much you just play normal, play your normal orders, try to get 4 orders in before, you know, your grade 3 ride, and then that's pretty much the game plan for you against any deck. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the Luticia deck profile. Hopefully this is interesting to you guys. If there are any other decks that you want me to cover, comment down below what you guys have in terms of suggestions. I think there's Overlords, well, Phantom Blaster Overlord, there's a Lucia deck profile that I'm probably going to release in the very near future. If you guys like this video, pop a like, comment down below what you guys think about Luticia. It's a little bit outdated, but I think just by the sheer power of this deck, it is a really good pick for BSF, and we have seen quite a few results already in the past few Springfests. If you guys haven't subscribed already, press subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.